an indie mobile sensation which generated 4.5 million downloads. Join him as he explores how Terragenesis seamlessly integrates real scientific principles into its game mechanics while educating players. Alexander.
I've been told I'm a pretty loud guy, so I'm going to forego the use of mics right now, but if anybody in the back can't hear, just wave or, whatever. So yeah, I'm here to talk about Terragenesis, which is a game that I made mostly on my own, but it's become successful enough now that my wife and I were able to build a company around it, and now we've got 3 employees and growing. And it's all based on the idea of using real science in the game to accurately reflect what it would be like to colonize and terraform planets. So on the off chance that anybody here is unfamiliar with the term terraforming, terraforming is the process of taking a planet like Mars, where you have to wear a spacesuit to survive, and you thicken the atmosphere, you add oxygen, you add water, and you turn it into a planet like Earth, where you can just live out on the surface without any special NASA technology or anything. So it's always good to start out with a quote that's not from Confucius. But a lot of people here have probably heard this quote: I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. And that's basically the whole premise of Games for Change, is interactive experiences that teach people either information or empathy and ways to change the world. Definitely not from Confucius. It was coined by some school teachers in the 1960s, but whatever. But as I imagine a lot of people here have come up against, there's also a widely held belief, which is that I love learning, but I hate being taught. And that's something that I think everybody has experienced at some point, that it's more fun to learn on your own than to sit in class or something like that. And of course, a lot of people don't even agree with the first part. They don't think they like learning at all. They want to just have fun. And so that's something that obviously I think everybody struggles with probably in this room, and I certainly was struggling with when I wanted to make a game about the realistic challenges of colonizing Mars, because there are a lot of them, and you need to learn about them. But luckily, what I realized is anybody who says they don't like learning is just lying to themselves, because anytime you play a game, you have to learn the map. You have to learn what the gun does. You have to learn what the user interface does, and what is the difference between sticky grenades and frag grenades, and everything else that goes into the game. And of course, that's not even counting games like Hearts of Iron, where you basically need a PhD to play it at all. So, who am I? My name is Alexander Wynn. Like I said, I founded Edgeworks Entertainment off of the success of a game called Terragenesis. I'm a self-taught programmer. I've been making apps just in my free time because it's fun. And finally, my 25th app was Terragenesis. And it has gone on to be successful enough that this is now what I do full time. I'm a space nerd and a history nerd and just sort of an all-purpose nerd. And one of the things that I love doing is communicating how much I love this stuff. Teaching people what is cool about science and what is cool about history, because it's awesome. And too many people don't get that. So the story of Terragenesis started when I first saw the trailer for The Martian. So if anybody here has read the book The Martian or even seen the movie, you know that a lot of the cool part of The Martian comes from the fact that there's real science all throughout it. The challenges that he has to struggle against are real, and the solutions that he comes up with in the story are often way more complicated than anything that the audience members are going to keep up with. These are complicated chemistry issues or dealing with electrical engineering and that sort of thing. But it's conveyed through the story in a way that entertains and you learn along the way. So when the trailer first came out, I had been thinking about a game about colonizing Mars for years. And I thought to myself, if I was smart, I would have my game about the science of colonizing Mars available on the App Store when this movie about the science of colonizing Mars came out. The problem was that was in a month. And so I got to work, and I actually did it. I made a crappy little game about colonizing Mars in a month, but it was a crappy little game. It wasn't very fun. And so I went back to the drawing board, and about 11 months later, I had this, and that's very dark, but hopefully you can see it well enough. This is rendered in-game in Terragenesis. This is an image of Mars using actual data from NASA, height maps and surface maps. This isn't a fictionalized red planet that is just sort of rolling red hills. This is actually what Mars looks like. That's the Valles Marineris right there in the front. And in the game, you do exactly what you need to. You start warming up the planet, you start thickening the atmosphere, and all of a sudden Mars gets clouds. You start introducing water onto the surface, and you start to get oceans. These oceans fill in the lower elevation areas first, based again on actual topographical data, so you're actually seeing what oceans on Mars would look like. The oceans continue to grow, you start to add biomass onto the surface, and the terrain starts to turn green. And by the end, you've got a fully terraformed planet that is actually what Mars would look like. Not just you took a red planet and turned it into a green planet, but you took Mars as it exists right now, and you turned it into Mars as it could actually be. Wrapped it up in a game over the course of several months. This is actually an old app icon, but yeah, released it, and it became Terragenesis with the tagline that we developed: 1 year, 1 developer, 1 million players in our first year. And there are a bunch of reasons, I'm sure, but we were getting messages every single day from people who were so excited about the science. And so that, in a roundabout way, is what I'm here to talk to you about. I've come up with 3 ways that Terragenesis uses real science, and that anything can use real science, or real history, or real anything, to educate players without teaching them, because that, for some reason, turns people off. So method number 1 is the big one in Terragenesis. And this is don't teach it, assume it. The game is not about learning about Mars. The game is a builder. It's very much like SimCity. Along the way, though, you have to know certain things. You have to pick up on certain things. This is an image, again, from the game, and we're using actual textures for every world. Those are the actual clouds of Venus. That's obviously the actual map of Earth. We've got all the moons of the gas giants. We've got all the inner planets. We've got dwarf planets. We've got everything in the game based on real data. The atmosphere, the surface temperature, the oxygen levels. Sea levels are pretty much not a thing, but where they are, they're accurately rendered. And this just primes the user to pick up on these things. So this is the stats page in a game of Terragenesis that's going quite well. Like I said, the key metrics in the game are temperature, air pressure, oxygen levels, sea levels, and then biomass once the planet can support it. And all of these things are done using real units of measurement that scientists actually use. The temperature is measured in millikelvins. The atmospheric pressure is measured in pascals. We didn't need to do that. We could have atmosphere units. You need 10 clouds to terraform this planet. But why? Use pascals. Use the real thing, because now there are millions of people who know how to measure air pressure and who know that Earth's air pressure is 100,000 pascals and that you need 21% oxygen to be breathable by humans. And all of these sorts of things, not because they were ever taught it, but because that was just the goal in the game. And if they wanted to beat the game, they had to keep these numbers in mind. And of course, this method number 1, don't teach it, assume it, is done in a lot of other games. The Civilization series is famous for this. A lot of people, when they first played their first Civilization game, probably would have identified this guy as the Monopoly guy. But now they know what Teddy Roosevelt looks like, at least kind of. A lot of players wouldn't recognize Qin Shi Huangdi, first emperor of China. And they wouldn't be able to tell the difference between Cleopatra and Montezuma, even though they come from opposite sides of the planet. You don't need to know these things to play Civilization, but you just pick them up along the way. And so then, when you go back to your history class and people start talking about the Aztecs, you're like, oh wait, I know about the Aztecs. They killed me. I hate those guys. And then you might need to unlearn a thing or two because, you know, the Aztecs beat me with jet planes. But you have a framework. You know, it's all about making connections. And when you have these initial connections that the players are picking up on just from doing their thing, not from learning, but just because that's the way the game is, it begins that foundation, and the player never notices that they're gaining a greater appreciation of history. And of course, the greatest example of this in video games is the Assassin's Creed series, because every game takes place in a new historical era, and you're exploring roughly realistic cityscapes and landscapes. Aside from Unity, they even use the actual accents of the places, so you get a flavor for, oh, this person is clearly not from around here because he sounds different. You are able to literally climb all over historical buildings. And who knows how many players are out there wandering around right now knowing exactly what the Duomo looks like and where to find it, not because they've ever been to Italy, but because they climbed up the outside of it in Assassin's Creed. And again, this is not an educational game. This would never be billed as something to play in the classroom, although I wouldn't be surprised if it has been played in classrooms. But it's not marketed that way, and nobody gets turned off because of it. It's all pretty much optional. If they fictionalized the, you know, Renaissance Europe more than they did, not many people would have objected, but they didn't. And that's what makes it so powerful as a teaching tool. This is a user-made collage. Every single person in this image is a historical figure from an Assassin's Creed game. They're basically never underlined as such. You could play through whole games in this franchise without recognizing that any of these characters are real. You just sort of assume it's a video game, they're all made up. But they're not. And you're learning about these characters as you play your way through. And then later, when somebody comes up to you and is talking about, oh, you know, Calico Jack in the golden age of piracy, you remember that guy. And they've peppered in little things throughout the game. Oftentimes, these games are actually anchored along significant historical events that the player has to kind of play around rather than playing through. And so you're learning as you go. So that's the number one, and also the most common, and oftentimes the hardest way of doing what I'm talking about, because it does mean that you actually have to integrate this kind of thing into your gameplay. I got lucky because in Terra Genesis it's mostly numbers, and so you're presented with a fairly easy choice of do you want to use real numbers or fake numbers, and yeah, let's use the real numbers. Obviously it's harder to recreate Venice, but it's a very potent tool.